Welcome to this Fane online event. My name is Carrie Lloyd and I have the great honour of being joined by an absolute legend. It is, of course, the incredible Michael Rosen. Hello.
Hello, Carrie. Thanks for having me.
Thank you. Thank you so much for joining us. It is such an honour to speak to you today. Your book, Many Different Kinds of Love, is available now in paperback, which is very, very exciting. If people don't know, it is about your story of getting COVID right at the beginning of the pandemic and your slow road to recovery, which I think is still an ongoing process. It's not something that just ends and everything's fine. I wondered if approaching this book was a very different process to in the past of your writing poetry, whether this was something that you felt more emotional about writing, or if you had it brimming in you ready to go.
There were several things that were very different. I mean, usually if I'm writing, let's say I'm writing a poem about, I don't know, my dad telling me and my brother off. Well, the memory sits there and it's quite coherent. And my job is to sort of pick the bones out and put it down on the paper, finding some ironies, finding some moments that maybe children will find funny or something like that. That's one kind of writing I do. Another kind of writing I do is more musical, where I might be looking at the way the sea falls on the sand and make a sort of little musical piece out of it. And another kind of poem might be something a bit more barbed, a bit more about life in general, my sort of adult stuff. This was different. A whole chunk of it was different because you've got to imagine, so I've been in a coma for about 40 days, in intensive care for about, in all about 47 days, of which 40 are in a full coma. And then people talk about, they use the word conscious and unconscious, but actually that isn't what happens. You're unconscious and then they try to get you round. They try to wake you up. And some people do wake up, some people don't wake up, and some people are in a state sort of halfway between the two. And there's this moment, and it might last for a few days or perhaps a bit longer, where you're quite confused, you're a bit delirious, and you're actually confused about being confused. So people are telling you things like my wife, Emma, or doctors or nurses, and then within hours you've forgotten it, or the next day you've forgotten it. Now, when I sat down and started writing things is when I come out of hospital. That's after 3 weeks in rehabilitation. So I come home and all this stuff is bobbling around in my brain, whatever metaphor you want of a sponge or swirling waters or something like that. And I say to myself, I'm going to write some of this down. But instead of it being that kind of coherent thing of remembering when my dad said, never let me see you doing that again, or something like that, it's all burbly and mixed up. And what did Emma mean when she said, what was that about? What did the doctor mean when he said you were very poorly, but you're less? What did they tell me that I was on? What was it they called the drugs? So all this is swimming around. So the writing is more like an act of retrieval rather than a sort of act of exposition. So it felt very much like I was sort of pulling strands out. Do you know, sort of, I don't know what the image is, you know, I can see something in cooking where you're sort of pulling bits of spaghetti out of the water and going, I wonder whether that's cooked. Oh, no, it's more than al dente. Blimey, no, that's no good. Bung it back in. So, you know, when you do that, and sometimes the spaghetti slips out of off the spoon and you get cross because you can't get the spaghetti out.
Yeah.
It's a bit more like that. Yeah.
Was it, I wonder, like, in writing about this, did more memories come?
Yes.
What, as you sat down, and did it help? Was it a healing process to kind of find yourself going, oh, that is what happened to me once you wrote it down? And also, I suppose, once you read what those doctors and the ITU nurses and all those people who stepped up to the plate during that first awful wave, which are in the book and at the beginning, and it's hard not to read them and weep with just how little everybody knew. But yeah, sorry, that's lots of questions. So I wondered, did it help you in writing, in retrieving it all down? And what was the effect of reading other people's versions of the events as well?
Yeah. So first of all, did it help? Oh, you bet it did. I mean, I often think that the page, whether it's on the screen or a piece of paper in front of you, it's a friend. You can talk to it and it won't answer you back, and it won't be horrible to you. It won't laugh at you and mock you. It just receives what you say. And I love that. I love the idea there's this blank page and I can write down something that I've heard somebody say, or that I've thought, or just a picture or a sound, and I can just put it down there on the page. So that was a great help, because if we stick with my kind of massive spaghetti sitting in the bowl, it's kind of chaos. But then if I can lay the strands of spaghetti out in a row, I can go, oh, right, the spaghetti is that long, is it? Oh, very good. And if I chop that one in half, put it there, oh, look, I can make patterns with the spaghetti. So that's a help, because, you know, if you think it's chaos, if you think it's a miasma, and then you get order to it, that feels very satisfying, feels very pleasing. What was the other bit? The other people's comments. Yeah. So I saw the world from the inside out. So I'm lying in bed and looking at what's happening to me and utterly mystified and have no sense of time. And whatever sense of time I've got is wrong anyway. Or, you know, like when a nurse came up to me and said, "What are you in here for?" And I said, "Well, I don't know. And if you don't know and I don't know, we're in trouble, aren't we?" And then off she went. You know, I haven't actually put that in the book. But anyway, yes, there were lots of those kinds of experiences. But you see, because I had these letters from the nurses, then instead of it being inside out, it's outside in. So what I've got is their view of me. So all their comments, things like, "Oh, we had to shave you today because we didn't want it to go septic round the tracheostomy tube." And I'm going, "Really? I don't remember that." Or 15 of us sat round your bed and sang you happy birthday. "Did you? And what did I do?" You know, I sort of reading it and I go, "Well, what did I do?" And then they say things like, "You were getting a bit agitated." Well, what was that like? Was I sort of lying in bed going, "Argh!" I don't know. Or sometimes they say things like, "You can't speak because you've got the tracheostomy tube in there. So that means it cuts out your vocal cords." So I would indicate things. But I got no memory of this. So the idea there's this kind of bloke who's me sitting in bed going, I don't know. I don't think, was I allowed to eat? I don't know. There were times when I had a tube down my mouth. Obviously, I couldn't eat. I was on a drip. And then they took that out and gave me the tracheostomy. I think that's what they did. And then they started giving me what they call, I noticed the nurses call puree, which always makes me think, because in France, the word puree, it means mashed potato. So it's quite funny. I just sort of think when they say, "We gave you puree," I sort of imagine them kind of spooning sort of mashed potato. And French mashed potato is very loose and with a lot of butter in it. So it sort of doesn't actually taste like mashed potato at all. So the image, every time I get to that bit puree, I just imagine a French person going, "Encore de purée, monsieur? Encore? Merci beaucoup. Yeah, j'aime beaucoup la purée." Anyway, but so yes, it's outside in, and they're reflections on me. I mean, lovely, generous things. Nurses saying, "Oh, I was singing 'We're Going on a Bear Hunt' to my children last night," and I come in and there you are. And I'm thinking, that must be strange. You know, it must be very strange. So yeah, lots of that.
I know. I found the nurses' letters to you very powerful. I think, you know, it wasn't that long ago, so it's all very fresh for all of us. But to read these letters to you, when obviously they, like you said, they knew you, they knew your words, and they were desperately trying to keep you alive. And also, you really get the sense from these letters, as I said, that, you know, it says in brackets at the end, or they say to you, "Oh, I'm normally a speech and language therapist, but I'm working in intensive care." And we're just reading a sentence like that, which was so normalized because everyone was sort of pitching in, but reading it from now still makes me cry, because I just think, God, what must have been going through their heads, that they were completely out of their depth. So, you know, one of them writes like, "Oh, I'm new, so I'm just writing everything down today. My job is just to write stuff down." Being in that ward, as you said, no one knew who had COVID, who didn't, if it was caught. And there's a wonderful the letter from Dr. Katie, who sort of saved your life at the beginning, when she says after getting you to A&E and helping Emma get you there, she ran home and her daughter tried to hug her and she had to stop her because it was at the point where you didn't even know, should you touch me? Should you be like, I found those letters just still shocking. Is it still shocking to you that?
And several things really, very shocking. And you've got to remember the strain because, you know, an intensive care nurse is trained to deal with, you know, people in dire straits who might die and do die at any point. So they're trained and helped to cope with that. They've got, you know, mental strategies and so on. People who are just dragooned in, recruited in, as you say, speech and language therapists, a dental nurse, people like that, they're not ready for the thing that is an intensive care ward. So you've got to imagine a ward that's kitted out for 11 beds, but instead of 11, there's 24. So it's massively overcrowded. All the staff are dressed up looking like spacemen. They're all in their, you know, what's it called? PPE, but a special full PPE with gowns and gloves and the rest of it. So they're walking around and with kind of welly boot things. And so they're very sort of cumbersome and slow, finding it quite difficult. And they, you know, they're not really communicating as we normally do, with very sort of tactile way through looking at gesture and face and so on. So they're from behind all this stuff. And then, and you've got to say this, is that people are dying on the ward when I was there at a rate, I think the consultant said, of 42%. So I'm in a ward with 24, you could do the maths, it must be about 10 dying. So at a fair old rate. And that, how do you take that? You come in. So for example, one of the nurses, he told me that he kept a diary of his own and he sent it to me. And he changed all the names and he called me Mr. Jacobs. And so he says one day, he says, I said a few Hail Marys over Mr. Jacobs, even though he's Jewish, you see. And it's just lovely, isn't it? There's this guy, Irish American, I think he is. He comes in and he says a Hail Mary and he knows Mr. Jacobs is Jewish, that's me, right? And it doesn't matter. And it's just the sort of loving care of the idea that he would do that because that's in his culture and his belief. And then the next day he comes in and he writes, Mr. Jacobs is still alive. And I looked at that and I thought, good old Mr. Jacobs, you know, because there we were. That's me.
That's me. Oh,
that's me. God. So that meant that he had written it the night before he left and he thought, I wonder whether Mr. Jacobs is going to be alive in the morning or whether he's going to cop it. And so he comes in and he goes, oh, right, he's still alive. That's amazing, given what it was coming up on the bip, 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 you know, there were a few of them that weren't bipping, you know, bip, a bit, bip, you know, one of those was going on. And, you know, I just sort of think that strain of that must have been enormous. And you've got to make it safe for yourself. If you're a nurse in those situations, not that you don't care, just the opposite, but that when somebody dies, it can't be for you a disaster. It can be sad, it can be a shame, it could be a pity, but you can't break up each time somebody dies. So there's you know, but for the new people coming in, must have been very difficult. And as you say, that comes through in the letters when they say, you know, normally I'm, or somebody says, I've got to get back to bowels and bladder next. That's right. And you go, sorry? Well, that's because normally they're in a bowels and bladder ward and not usually with people, you know, where it's touch and go by the second.
Yeah, I think it's an extraordinary start to the book and a keen reminder of where we were at in, you know, at this April 2020, what was going on. And I felt especially moved when they printed out your poem to the NHS and said, we printed it out, we put it by your bed. You wrote that before the pandemic, that's right, isn't it?
Yes, I think I wrote it for the 60th anniversary. I think, was it the 60th? Anyway, I wrote it for the anniversary of the NHS, but then one way or another, it became a bit of an anthem. And I believe health workers, one sort or another, were putting it up. I think it's carved on a staircase in a hospital in Glasgow. And then I gather it was recited by Michael Sheen, no less, on the radio. In fact, he reads it much better than me, which is always very irritating for a poet, but it's lovely because I love him, so that's great. So Michael Sheen recited it to Joe Wiley, I think, on radio, what would that be, Radio 2, I think. And then I think it was on telly because I had to come back after I came back.
Yeah.
And I think I had to read it on the telly, on a news program, I think. So yes, I don't think I've ever had written a poem that's really had that kind of a spread. Yeah,
it's extraordinary. So I was going to say, does it feel strange that you wrote something, for love of NHS before you were so, as you said, so indebted and so grateful for what they had done to you? Not in the knowledge, when you wrote that, obviously you were just celebrating what is an incredible institution that we are all so proud of, that it became this different thing. I suppose what I'm asking is, the power a poem can have outside of your initial reach to that page, the friend, it just disappears into something else.
Yes, I mean, I did know the NHS quite well for a variety of reasons. Yeah. I'd had my nose straightened, not, let me say, for cosmetic reasons, but because it'd been smashed by a cricket ball. I'd been knocked over in the road when I was 17, and I was in hospital for 10 weeks while they knitted my pelvis together, and in a rehab hospital where they taught me how to walk. So, I keep learning how to walk. It's really, I'm getting quite good at it, So that had happened. And then both my mother and father cared for to their last days with the NHS. My son, who died. So one way or another. And then I had a very, very strange illness called hypothyroidism. And so I had encounters with the NHS for about 12, 13 years and more with that. So the NHS is with me late and soon. And so I've sort of got to know it well. So when I sat down to write it, even though it's before this particular bout, I could draw on that sense of hospitals and care and so on, just based on my experience, which was, some people hardly see a doctor from sort of the age of 5 to, 80 or something. Some people are quite lucky in that respect, but others of us, we've hopped in and out quite often. And certainly my experience, say, coming off the end of hypothyroidism, when I sat in what's called the metabolic unit, doesn't sound very romantic, does it? Where were you? I was in the metabolic unit, getting a lot of metabolics. Anyway, sorry, excuse me. That was a very strange experience. So these things, they sort of slowly feed in, so I could use that when I wrote the poem. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Well, speaking of poems.
Yes, Michael.
We could have one, because I think you do read them very well. I wonder what would you think would be a good one for now?
Well, I could read that one. These are the hands anyway.
Yes,
so I could read that.
Yeah.
I do believe it's in here. It should be, shouldn't it? Yes, that's right. I'm an audiologist, she said. Have you heard of that? No, that's just a silly joke. Sorry, here we go.
It's a good one.
Here we go. These are the hands that touch us first, feel your head, find the pulse, and make your bed. These are the hands that tap your back, test the skin, hold your arm, wheel the bin, change the bulb, fix the drip, pour the jug, replace your hip. These are the hands that fill the bath, mop the floor, flick the switch, soothe the sore, burn the swabs, give us a jab, throw out sharps, design the lab. And these are the hands that stop the leaks, empty the pan, wipe the pipes, carry the can, clamp the veins, make the cast, log the dose, and touch us last. So that was, in its own way, quite appropriate, because I'd sort of lie in bed and look at people busying around, and you'd see a plumber mending the leaks and then having a little bit of fun thinking, well, they might have to mend my leak in a minute, because as I say somewhere in the book, we are really just a set of tubes, held together with a sort of bag, which we call skin, but virtually everything under the bag is a tube. There's a subject called biophysics that is basically the physics of stuff going through tubes, which pretty well sums up everything in your body. Tubes, chambers, it just about solves it all. So you kind of think there's all sorts of analogies between the physical stuff and the mental and physical stuff in your body. I mean, the physical stuff outside. So, someone who's mopping the floor is not doing much that's physically different from soothing the sore. So, poets are interested and want other people to be interested in why one thing is like another. We have these things called similes and metaphors, but we sometimes try to hide them. But you hope that people will go, oh yeah, it is a bit the same. And that is a basic thing that poetry can do, which is to help us understand the world by seeing why one thing is like another and another thing is very much not like another. And so you want those things of, oh, that's like that. Ah, no, that isn't like that at all. And that's the sort of feelings that anyone who writes poems, you want readers to get from the poem. Tiger, tiger, burning bright in the burning. Hang on a minute. Why is the tiger burning? And then you read on and maybe figure it out what he's on about, that maybe the tiger was made by a blacksmith who is called the big G is God, and that's what you want from poems. For you just accept it and then suddenly go, really? Why has he said that? Anyway, that sort of thing.
Yeah, I mean, it's a beautiful poem, and I'm very glad of its existence, and sad that a pandemic had to come along to lift it even higher, because it is such a perfect pandemic poem. It's just like, yes, that's what we all absolutely needed. It is truly, truly wonderful. And I said the care that the NHS take of all of us, and what you have done with this book, which I think is so interesting, is to choose one narrative, to say this is the story, these are all the people that cared for me, and I'm just one person. And that does make you, somewhere in your brain, go, my God, that's what the NHS is, this huge array of people. It's not just you and a doctor, it's this, like you said, all those people you meet along the way, from the GP who helps you get in there, to the nurses, to the rehab, to this. So we should move to talking, I suppose, about, you made it. You got to recovery.
We think so. Don't forget, you're only looking at me on Zoom, so I could be a puppet. There could actual fact be a hand up my bum going.
Oh, what did you call yourself at the end? The Jewish ghost? What's the name?
Yeah, yes, that's right. So I was going to say, yes, I could be a Jewish ghost. It's called a dibbuk.
Dibbuk.
In Yiddish, I think. And yes, the dibbuk, it's probably Hebrew actually. And the dibbuk is a quite unpleasant ghost, actually. He's not sort of, yoo-hoo, hello, I'm a ghost. He goes around haunting people in kind of quite obnoxious ways. So I sort of tell myself I'm the dibbuk of Muswell Hill. And that when I meet people, that actually they think they're meeting me, but really I'm haunting them. So they go, certainly that happens less, but it's still happening actually, that when I walk to my office, right, people go, hey, it's you. And I go, are you sure? Or maybe it's not. Anyway, I can't resist mucking around. Or you're alive, am I? Anyway, any of those, I play with all those things. And then I sort of think, well, that's maybe what I'm doing, is sort of haunting them, that they've walked and they haven't really seen me. They've imagined they've seen, like hauntings are. They think they've seen Michael Rosen. So there's an old English folk song called The Unquiet Grave, where, the person can't, it's lovers, and the guy can't rest in his grave because, for whatever reason, because he think the wife or the partner hasn't let him rest, so he's still wandering around. So there's a little bit of me thinks that I'm that figure from The Unquiet Grave, sort of wandering about haunting people. So I'm a mixture between The Unquiet Grave and the dibbuk, going, are you sure it's me? So it gets a bit serious. How do you know it's me? I suddenly become Woody Allen,
No, I thought it was a very funny way of looking at what you have been through. With that recovery phase, what point in the pandemic was it that you actually sort of made it home? So
I went home at the end of June 2020. So I think we were still in lockdown, weren't we?
I think by then, weren't we? Like we were only just beginning to be allowed.
Yeah. So I had a kind of soft landing, really. It was quite interesting. yeah, anyway, even so, there were lots of COVID restrictions wherever we were. I won't get the calendar exactly right there. And so people weren't traveling particularly. And then if people wanted me to talk, I didn't have to get on a bus or train or go anywhere, because I could set up Zoom. So really, it was very nice because I had a cushioned landing. I was doing readings for schools and things, certainly by September.
Wow.
And but instead of what I normally do, which is arrive at a school and then bounce about and go into classrooms and do a 1-hour show and so on, I was just sitting here like this, going down behind the dustbin. I met a dog called Jim. He didn't know me, and I didn't know Dave. Yeah, that's right. So anyway, all that. So I would do those, but I didn't have to get off my backside. So that was actually, in its own way, quite handy. But then that was the sort of physical aspect. Mentally, looking back on it, I was fighting, really. I think in June, July, August, I was to a certain extent pretending. If I look back on it now, so this is just a bit less than 2 years ago, I'm a good enough actor to have been able to pretend that I was better than I was. So people say, "How are you?" And I'd go, "Well, great, yeah." Notice the falsity, you see. "Yeah, no, I'm fine." And then I sort of almost kidded myself I was. But when I look back at it, I know that my mind was in a right old state, really. I mean, it took me days to realize that I had actually been in a coma, because Emma would say, "You were in intensive care, Michael." And I went, "Yeah," thinking it meant I was being cared for intensively. And I didn't know that the image didn't come to mind that we see when we see intensive care wards in hospitals, that had been me, you see, going, my eyes rolling, hands in the air. Not at all. I had no idea that was me. And then she'd say, "You were in a coma, Michael." And I'd go, "Right, yeah." And then the next day I'd say, "Can I get the timeline right again?" And I did make her a bit ratty, really, because I was nagging her. It was bad, really, where I'd say almost every day, "Can I just hang on a minute, Em? Can I just write this down?" So I was 1 week. I mean, really boring,
But of course, I understand you were trying to, when you've been out of it and unconscious, you've been out of the narrative. So you're like someone who walked out of a film for 20 minutes. You're just like, "Hang on, why are all these people there? I thought they were in love with this." Like, you're trying to get that ordered. So I completely understand that need.
Well, also, one image that came to my mind was that in the Odyssey, Odysseus, he manages to break all the rules. I forget who gives him the trick. I think it's Tiresias, who says, "I can get you into the land of the dead," And Odysseus goes, "Great, that's just what I'm after." So there'll be a dog, a tricky dog. You've got to miss the dog. You've got to get across the river. Maybe it's in the other order, but anyway, either way, river, dog. The river's called Styx. The dog's called Cerberus. Get in. Now, the big trick is to get out, because it's really tricky, because the geezer down there, Pluto or Hades or whatever his name is. No, Hades is the place, Pluto's the bloke. He doesn't want you to leave. So then Odysseus manages, with some trick that Tiresias has given him, gets out. And the more I thought about it, I thought I was Odysseus. I know it's kind of very grandiose, who am I? Who are you? "I am Odysseus." But anyway, if it's good enough for James Joyce, it's good enough for me. And Leopold Bloom is Odysseus, and he's an old Yiddish guy, so there's no reason why I shouldn't be. So I saw myself as getting to the land of the dead, tricking the dog, getting across the river, coming out, but leaving behind my eye and my ear. And as I've said in the poem, they're waiting for me. The ear is listening and the eye is the lookout. There you go. So that's a poem that I've done. So that's another kind of poem now I think about it, because instead of it being reflective or sorting out the order, it's more where you piggyback off a story that's already there. And that's another way of writing, which I like very much. Lots of poets do it. You write apocryphal stories, like imagining if you were a baker and Jesus was feeding the 5,000. Oi, is he price cutting here? I'm trying to sell bread. at 20p a loaf, and this guy's giving it away. What am I doing here? You know, my business is ruined by this guy. You see, that's like poets love these spaces if you change points of view. There's a guy called, I can't pronounce his name, but I think it's Alejo Carpentier, who wrote a poem from the point of view of the baker at the feeding of the 5,000, you know. Yeah, price cutting. So I like that. Or you become the person in the play, you become Macbeth. And though people won't know or notice, that there's something very basic about being in hospital and being helpless. Mm-hmm. So after I came round and I sort of knew where I was, even if I didn't know why, if you are, just to be really crude about it, with just you and your body. So you have your hands. I'm sorry about this, folks. You do feel yourself. Okay, you feel all your bits and your nooks and crannies, and you wonder if everything's there, and you wonder what's changed. And so I would feel my ribs and virtually play tunes on them because they were so, you know, there was no surface subcutaneous fat or anything. So brrr, 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 like that, you see, and odd little bony bits that sort of appeared in my chest and so on. And what I thought of, and I've written about this sort of experience, was what I was actually thinking of. Again, it's piggybacking off someone else, is that when King Lear, in the play of the name, King Lear and poor Tom, as we think he is at that point, his friend who's there, or companion, they're so raw, they've lost all their clothes and raiment, and they're just exposed to the storm. And the guy pretending to be poor Tom goes, poor Tom's a cold. And they say, we're poor forked creatures, meaning all we got is just legs. As the fork is the legs. And I was thinking of that a lot of the time. So there's a little sequence in the book, which is really, I'm down to the basics here, guys. There's not much I've got going on. The world, I'm bereft of the world. And I think that's a sort of experience that quite a lot of people have if they're helpless in hospital. I mean, some people are in hospital and you've broken your leg or something and you're not totally helpless. But in my case, I was I couldn't lift my legs and I definitely couldn't stand up. That was a ghastly experience in trying to get me to stand up. So I had to learn how to do all those things. But at the helpless stage, you are a forked creature, not much more.
Yeah, that's such a beautiful, beautiful way of expressing it, as always, with you, Michael. And I liked there was a bit in the book where you say, they owned your body. Like they came and took your obs and they were taking account of it, and it wasn't yours anymore. And I think that's also something people who've been in hospital can relate to, when you feel, like you said, it is this bag of skin and bones, and actually occasionally you're in charge of it, but occasionally someone else is in charge of it.
Yeah, well, the obs thing is very weird because, they do the blood pressure, you see it, and there's that, and they do the pulse, they do the temperature, tell you off because you haven't put the thermometer under your tongue. I've got a little bit there where she says, "You've got to, don't chew it," she says. I wasn't chewing it. No, don't chew it. Anyway, so there's all that, all sort of being bossed about stuff, which is great. I mean, I quite like it, really. And then she said, then suddenly the nurse goes all quiet, stands at the end of the bed and goes like this. And what they're doing is doing their observation. So I suppose they're looking to see whether you're breathing all right, or whether you're twitching, maybe, it could be anything. But it is quite unnerving the first time you sort of see them do it, because there's a whole little chit chat while they do the blood pressure, and there's also the little oximeter thing. There's a little crocodile on your finger, you see. And I say, what's it at? 95, great, because it was 58. 58 couldn't have been. It was actually. You'd be dead. Well, I don't think I'm dead. You tell me. We'd have these conversations, and then suddenly. The obs. And there was a sense, I think I describe it as a ledger that or an account that really there is sealed up in this, an account of you. And I also speculate about this whole idea that there's a life inside you. So I think when I go and get my echocardiogram, which I often call an echocardigan just to keep me going, that the echocardiogram is quite funny because it sort of, you hear your heart and you hear not just, you hear all sorts of sloshy noises. It's great. You hear kind of, and you think, blimey, is that all going on in there? And it is. There, look, listen. That's what it sounds like, your heart, as well as the, and then he says, and you're sitting there and he goes, your left ventricular fraction is good. It is. And then you think, is that a compliment? Should I go, when I go home tonight, I'm going to go, hi, Ems, left ventricular fraction, it's looking good. And I love that about medicine. It's like, it's like, I had to go to the brain hospital in January to see what my brain's like, you see. So you have the CT thing. So you go into this little kind of tunnel and it goes like that, you see, and they slide you in and slide you out the tunnel. And then I had to go for a cognitive function test.
Oh.
Where they say things like, who is the Prime Minister? How old were you when you left school? And then they start giving you harder things like 2 + 2, and things like that. Anyway, so you have that for an hour, and then this nurse looks after you for a bit and so on. And then you go for the case conference at the end of the day, sat down, and there's a screen up there. And the guy says, the consultant says, would you like to look at your brain? And I thought, yeah. I mean, it's quite difficult after all, looking at your brain, isn't it? Look, I'll try now. No, so you can't turn your eyeballs the wrong way around. So he presses a button on his computer and up comes this, somebody's cut through a cauliflower, right? Haven't they?
Yeah.
And that's what it looks like. It looks just like the inside of a cauliflower. It's just, and you're staring at it, you see. And he starts kind of pointing at things. So you had microbleeds here and stuff. And actually, your brain looks like somebody who had altitude sickness. And you go, does it? Yep, it does, you see. And then he's sort of pointing at things and you don't know what they are. And there's this hole in the middle of your brain, which I always worry about, the idea you've got a hole in the middle of your brain. I mean, why couldn't we fill it? It's strange. But actually what I was thinking about, looking at it, was what was I thinking about when they took the slice through the brain?
They tell?
Could you see if you imagine if at some point in the future you could look at the screen and you go like that and you say, oh yeah, that was when I was thinking about my Auntie Sylvia. Yeah, great. Or then I thought, well, they took it when I was in the CT scanner. And when I was in the CT scanner, I was concentrating very hard on a new way of breathing that I've invented. So I thought, that's what that brain is thinking. New way of breathing. That sort of thing. And these encounters with medics are absolutely brilliant. I love them. Absolutely brilliant. And there's quite a few in the book, aren't there? Yeah.
Maybe we could have another poem.
Yes.
Yeah. What about, I think I wrote down long-term objectives, if there's that.
Oh, yes, that's right.
That's sort of medical.
I was at home.
Yes.
2 physios come over. They ask me to walk across the room. They say, that's very good. They ask me to push my legs against their hands. They say, that's very good. One of them asks me, what are my long-term objectives? I stop and think, what are my long-term objectives? Do I have long-term objectives? Should I have long-term objectives? I would like to write a book about a French dog called Gaston le Dog. I don't say that. I say that I would like to be able to walk to the Jewish deli on the corner and wheel the shopping back in our trolley. The physio smiles. She writes it down in her book. I'm trying to say that going shopping and bringing it back seems huge, much bigger than anything I can do now. It feels like a long-term objective. Anything else, she says? Live for a bit more, I say. And I've never bothered to pickle cucumbers. I just buy them. But my mother made lovely pickled cucumbers. I would like to try that one day. You're doing very well, they say. So yes, long-term objectives. That was quite interesting. Yes. So physiotherapists are incredible. I mean, the ones at the rehab hospital, they worked a kind of tough cop, soft cop thing with me. So there was a bloke who was in the Greek army, and he would arrive at my bedside and go, 1, 2, 3, let's go. And I'd look at him, you've got to imagine someone completely inert, right? So when he says, let's go, there's nothing I can do apart from wave my arms about, okay? So he'd sort of look at me a bit puzzled, and then he'd swing my legs round and then try and lever me out of the bed. And I'd kind of sort of stand there, but I couldn't. So they had to get 3 other people to prop me up, you see. But then Ashma, the soft cop, would come along and she'd say, well, maybe we'll go to the gym today. I'll put you in a chair. See, completely different approach. And between them, you see, because what you've got to deal with somebody in my situation is I couldn't stand up, I couldn't walk, but also in my mind, I'm going to admit this now, I don't think I've admitted this before, I didn't want to learn how to walk. Because actually you quite like just being in bed. In fact, I think I wrote a poem about the bed is seducing me. Come back to bed. Come to bed, you know you love me. I can cover you all over with lovely warm blankets. Come back to me. And, bed was very sexy. It was lovely to go back to bed. But so you don't really want to do this horrible thing of having to get sort of half dressed and believe it or not, what they say to you is, we're going to the gym. The gym? You're kidding. And it's a gym with weights and benches and worst of all, balloons. No, I mean, seriously, there's parallel bars. I say not the kind of parallel bars you see at the Olympics, so you've got to walk along them, more like parallel bars you've got to hold to sort of swing your legs to learn how to walk. And then Ashma said, I'm going to throw you a balloon now. And she threw me the balloon and then said, this is the really difficult one, throw it back. Wow. You're kidding. You have no idea how heavy that balloon was. You didn't know that balloons could be heavy, but if you've been in a coma for 40 days, your body is completely deconditioned. Yeah. So to go like that, your body can't do it. So your mind says, you remember that time you threw a balloon at a party and went, way, like that? You can't do that anymore because you go like, and nothing happens, nothing at all. And so she'd say, throw it, Michael. Of course, the Greek policeman, he might have gone, 1, 2, 3, let's go. He wasn't there for that one, but Ashma coaxed me to throw the balloon. So that was amazing. And then, well, there was there were these hero moments, if I might express that. Yeah. So there was an occasion. I tried to walk to the loo without using Sticky McStick stick. I should explain, I learnt how to walk with a stick, and I gave it a name because I thought it was a rather kind of utilitarian NHS stick that needed to come alive a little bit. I try to walk to the loo without using Sticky McStick stick. I stagger. I think of M people, Heather Small. I sing to myself, search for the hero inside yourself. Yeah, when I get there, I sit on the loo wondering how many people have sung, search for the hero inside yourself to get themselves to the loo. Probably not many. Probably not even Heather Small herself, I'm guessing. Yeah. But anyway.
We need to ask. We need to find her and ask her.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
I think you captured it so beautifully, that kind of that sense of illness and that sense of when you have been ill for a long time, that there is a part of you that it's comfortable. It's like that plateau, isn't it? You're like this I know, and everything out there is different and scary, and it's frightening to have to go, come on, we're going to have to do this. And I think you capture that so so wittily and heartfeltly, if that's a word. I wondered, so as you were recovering and you said you went back to work, but obviously there's still the other process of recovering that you maybe weren't so conscious of. What did you feel like when we headed for another lockdown, the numbers were spiking again, like as someone who'd been in the first wave of it and who had up to a certain point recovered? I wonder what it felt like to sort of see it sort of still ongoing, still not being fixed, still the numbers rising, if it was scary, or how did you feel?
I mean, I'm a bit dubious about the way in which the government has handled it. I think there's quite a lot of evidence to suggest that they thought they could kind of get away with it. They entertained a theory called herd immunity theory. Under herd immunity, they thought that people who are old and weak could die and the rest wouldn't. And they made some kind of calculation around that. And you don't have to be able to read the runes to see people saying it. Government scientists said it, 3 of them, all on the same day. Boris Johnson talked about not wanting to bring in any market segregation, as he put it. In other words, no kind of interference in the market in order to deal with it. So what were they going to do? They were just going to sit on their hands and let everyone get ill and see what happens. And it was based on a theory that, well, as far as I know, it's bad biology, because insofar as groups get immune, it normally takes at least a generation, because it becomes a genetic thing. In other words, it's the old Darwinian thing. Those who are best adapted to deal with this new situation are the ones who reproduce and then create a generation that has those genes that can survive. That's what survival of the fittest actually means. It doesn't mean you're really fit. It means you're best adapted. So there's evolutionary theory behind herd immunity, but they were talking about herd immunity in a few weeks or months, not and without vaccination. It was just that people get ill and become immune. Well, that's bad as well, because there's always mutations, as we know. And also some people's resistance wears off. Again, we know that. Yeah. So I don't know why they were playing with this idea. And as a consequence, they decanted old people out of the hospitals into the care homes. That would have lost thousands. And then other people were spinning about in February and March while they dithered. And, you know, there was a lot of people got very ill and a lot of people died. And, you know, at some point or another, we're going to have to ask the questions. And I was piecing this together, believe it or not, you know, and I came out, I've written a couple of poems about it in the book. And I was sort of beginning to piece this together. And then, so when these new waves came in, I thought, do they know what to do? Are they really concerned with it? Are they doing the right thing? So I was following people like Independent Sage and so on. Yeah, it was all very concerning. I mean, it is even now. I mean, basically, they've said they're now working on the basis that we can get ill because we're sufficiently vaccinated. The only problem is that there are still a lot of people who aren't vaccinated and they're getting very ill. You know, you only have to talk to medics, and you know that the hospitals aren't as full, but the people there, most of them haven't been vaccinated. So the whole idea that vaccination should be a sort of, you know, do it if you want to, don't worry about it if you don't, and just sort of rely on the goodwill of people. I'm not saying it had to be compulsory, but I think they should have somehow or other wound that up more, the vaccination and the boosters as well, that somehow or other be more urgent about it, because they've put huge pressures on the NHS even now. I mean, the vaccination is genius. It's stunning. It's amazing. It's a fantastic achievement of all those who invented it and have put it out there. And it isn't actually Boris Johnson who's doing the jabs. I mean, just in case people think that because he's so proud of it, he's actually been the one going all on his own. Yeah. I can reveal the science here. He didn't.
Yes, absolutely. And I think it comes back to what we were saying earlier about the NHS, that one of the things I read was our vaccination programme was so successful because we had the NHS. So we already had an infrastructure set up. We have everyone's records. We already vaccinate lots of people all the time. So of course, when you introduce a new one, it's much simpler. And I thought that was a real narrative that I felt didn't get shouted enough, of like, actually the hero here is the NHS again. It's this incredible thing that, you know, in some ways shouldn't exist. And it's a miracle that it's still here. And I think so many of us feel so grateful for it and so precious of it. And anything that is not derogatory, but doesn't give it the credit that it's due. As you said, it wasn't Boris Johnson personally vaccinating people, and I felt like sometimes that was the narrative coming across, rather than this incredible old institution just stepping up again.
Yeah. I loved it when MPs came on and were talking about Boris Johnson getting all the calls right, and they were saying, I don't know what he did, but he pulled a lever here, or he did this, and they were going, got all the calls right, and in the list would be the vaccination program. And I remember thinking, really, was that his call? Did he sit in number 10 and sort of, he invented the vaccine? He was sitting there, and he had a pen and a key, and he was going, right, so if you put that with there, you could get a vaccine, and then I could rush around with the little needles, and, he got all the calls right. I thought, these people who were slaving away in labs, some of which are publicly funded, let it be said, as branches of the NHS, though I think somebody said they've just flogged off one of them. But anyway, there they were, being incredibly ingenious, thinking of these vaccinations. And then, as you say, all the facilities were in place, and you had GPs and nurses and people who could then, as it were, work as volunteers alongside people who were the technicians and knew how to do it, and it all went into place. But as if somehow or other, standing above it or over it was the great general, was Boris Johnson, Lord Wellington, commanding the troops, off you go now, away you go. Yes, there you go. Muswell Hill, that surgery there. Vaccinate. No, not at all. It's tragic. We don't know the treasure we've got. And it'll get like that Joni Mitchell song about you don't know what you've got till it's gone,
I know. And I think we're also suffering from, again, this narrative of individuals, which sort of fits our like nice idea of a hero, the hero, rather than actually what the NHS, which is a very complicated, as your book shows, network of lots and lots of people who do lots of different things and occasionally have to help each other. And like you said, from physio to intensive care to it's hard for people to put that in their head and to make a hero, which is why I think that poem you wrote is so successful, because in some way it encompasses what is a huge spider's web of help. And I think that really helps people to go, oh, I see, the NHS isn't just my GP who I can't currently get an appointment with. The NHS is this and the plumber. Oh, I see, that's worth my taxes. That is important. So I think that's, the power of words. As we're heading to the end, I wonder if we could just hear the one about the park, going to the children's, because I love
yes, that's right. So I'm very lucky. I have grown-up-ish sons who've looked after me as I come to walk about, and I'm just going to find this for you in 1 second. I did have it marked. One there about every now and then I get the memory of the hospital smell again, a déjà whiff. I'm beginning to think I'm attached to hospital now. My head lives there. Now, wait a minute. Where's the guy? Yes, I meet my grown-up children in the park. They take the dad for a walk. I don't have a lead. I don't run off. And I don't sniff other dads.
That's wonderful, Michael. Thank you so much for talking to me and of this Fane online event. Many Different Kinds of Love is available now. It's such a beautiful book, and I think it's important to say it's not depressing considering what it is you've been through. It's really uplifting. It will make you well up, but it also make you remember how
and spoiler alert, I lived. So, there's not much tension in the book. Sorry about that. You may be like page 69 and wonder, did this bloke survive? Yeah. And I've spoilt it now. I'm sorry. That's ruined it, actually, hasn't it?
It would be much more tragic and possibly turned into a film if it was a different ending. But as it is, a collection of joyful poems.
Well, it could be. Doesn't George Clooney die in Gravity and yet goes on talking? There's various films. Well, of course, famously, Sunset Boulevard.
Yeah,
the whole film is narrated by a bloke who's drowned in a pool. So, you begin with that image, don't you, of the bloke drowned. And it's his narrative. And you think afterwards, well, how did he make the film then? Oh, well, he didn't. It was Billy Wilder. And I think George Clooney does the same thing. Do you know, I forgot George Clooney's name in my memory loss.
Oh, yes. I love this story. You say this story.
Yeah. No, I sat there. Well, I had it several people. First of all, the first person I really panicked. I couldn't remember his name. I was sitting there going, he's in all these movies, you know, and he's got a little sort of, he frowns and smiles at the same time, and he's always got floppy hair, and he's always running somewhere, and he's Mission Impossible. What's his name? What's his name? And he jumps out of windows, and you know, he does everything. He does his own stunts. What's his name? And he's been on Graham Norton, and he goes, yeah, Graham, yeah. Who is he? Tom Cruise. Got it. Then I sat there a few days later going, Nespresso. What else? What's his name? His auntie is called Rosemary. Rosalind? Rosemary? What is it? What's it? He's got a beard. He was in ER. He was a doctor. He was a doctor in ER. Then he stopped being a doctor and he married a woman and lives. And he did a film. He directs. If there's a, what's his name? Rosemary. What is it? George Clooney. And it went on one after another. So I decided I had famous Hollywood star forgetting syndrome. Yeah, that's right. So indeed. So these are the experiences you have. Many things forgotten, many things remembered.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Michael. It's been a pleasure talking to you.
Thank you, Carrier. Thank you very much.